Good morning and welcome back to the Marble Mountain Ranch hearing. Appreciate everyone returning in a prompt manner. I'm Stephen Moore, Vice Chair of the State Water Board and the hearing officer for this proceeding. I'll be assisted by Staff Counsel Lily Weaver, Staff Environmental Scientist Mmr Am, and Staff Engineer Gene McHugh. We also have other staff assisting us today. Once again, before we get started, in case if you hear a fire alarm or emergency sound, please proceed in orderly fashion toward the exits to my left, to your right, and we'll meet out in the parking lot before we get the all clear to come back in. We're broadcasting this hearing on the internet and recording both audio and video. In addition, a court reporter, Peter, is present to prepare a transcript of the proceeding. Anyone who would like an expedited copy of the transcript must make separate arrangements with the court reporter. When you speak, please be sure to use the microphone so everyone can hear you here in the room and on the internet. Please take a moment to turn off or mute your cell phones. Even if you think it's already off or muted, please double check, and we appreciate that. Some housekeeping items. Today we'll resume cross-examination of Marble Mountain Ranch's remaining witness, Doug Cole, by the Kuruk tribe. Then we continue with direct testimony from the National Marine Fisheries Service, California Department of Fish and Wildlife, and remaining witnesses from the Kuruk tribe and Old Man River Trust. And a couple of housekeeping items. The tables that Mr. Kramer discussed on Monday are now posted and labeled as MMR 22. We have hard copies if any of the parties would like them. Also, we'll be posting Staff Exhibit 1 labeled as SWRCB-1, which was the diagram from Mr. Anderson with approximate flow measurement locations as discussed yesterday. Are there any questions or other housekeeping items before we continue? Mr. Petrozelli?
Do we have another hard stop for time for later today?
I'm going to propose a 4:30 stop time today.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. So we'll do our best to be as efficient as possible. Okay. Yes. Yes, Mr. Fisher.
Am I able to question Mr. Cole? That wasn't one of the things you said.
Yes.
Okay, and then direct testimony at some point in this process? We talked about that yesterday.
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Would Mr. Cole, Ms. Brenner, and Mr. Hunt please come back up? We have Mr. Hunt up here. And we can get underway as soon as you're comfortable and ready to go. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning, Mr. Cole.
Good morning.
Do you measure the amount of water that you divert from your at the diversion point?
There's no measuring device at the diversion point. There is a measuring device, rudimentary though it is, further down ditch.
So at the point of diversion, you don't have a way of measuring the diversion?
It's a rock and rubble berm. There's no structure in that rock and rubble berm.
And the measuring device that you talked about further down the ditch, what is that?
Hash marks placed on the side of a retaining culvert that the captured flow passes through so that it acts as a stream side, the equivalent to what you would see at a stream measuring station where you have a stadia rod that has a conversion table attached to CFS flows. So I have arbitrary units that I call stanchia units marked on the side of a culvert in a automotive paint pen, and based on any given year and the condition of the ditch at that point, I have the capacity to convert that to a rough CFS flow. I also have several points along the ditch line where I routinely measure flows using a swuffer.
Have you ever filed with the State Water Board, made a filing with the State Water Board stating that you comply with the diversion measurement regulations?
Do you know?
Are you conferring with your counsel on the answer to this?
A lot of what I do is relative to the State Water Board. I refer to our attorneys. So, and prior to my engaging Churchwell White, I filed some annual reports. Is that what you're referring to?
I'm just wondering whether you filed anything with the State Water Board stating that you comply with diversion measurement regulations.
Historically, I've turned in annual reports that were requested by State Water Board asking for summaries of flows in the ditch line. So on that point, yes.
But you're not sure whether those are
I don't know if those are in
compliance with-
compliance with the regulation that you're citing.
All right, I'd like to pull up MMR 11 exhibit, and we can look at page 1. And in your testimony yesterday and written testimony, you indicate that the fire crews divert up to 3 CFS for fire suppression.
I did not state that. I said they divert from the ditch line, but the ditch is conveying 3 CFS. The capacity of the ditch is 3 CFS, and so they withdrew from the ditch for fire suppression.
Is there any actual measurement of the amount of water that they're withdrawing?
No.
So looking here at exhibit MMR 11, I can't turn that. Sorry, I was trying to turn the screen, it didn't work. Looking at this exhibit MMR 11, which is looks like a statement from David Markin, who is he? Who is David Markin?
David Markin is
Oh, here he is, the
Yeah.
District Fire Management Officer for the United States
Correct.
Forest Service. And in it, it says, as part of those activities, we use water from the diversion ditch that provides water to the ranch at its full capacity of 3 cubic feet per second. Does this document state that the Forest Service uses 3 cubic feet per second from the ditch for fire suppression service?
No, that's a characterization of what the ditch is. He's stating that he's diverting water for fire suppression on a routine basis, and that the ditch provides a total availability of 3 cubic feet per second, which is my position all along, that that's the capacity of the ditch of 3 cubic feet per second. This document isn't saying how much they've diverted out of the ditch at any given time.
Okay, thank you. Do you know that the United States Forest Service has a policy of not allowing the filling of fire trucks from areas that service thermal refugia along the Klamath River?
I don't have any knowledge of any U.S. Forest Service policies on those points.
Do you know that the United States Forest Service has a method for using water from the main stem of the Klamath River to fill fire trucks in order to avoid using water from thermal refugia areas?
I've seen that.
And what is that you've seen?
Water tenders back up into the river and pump water directly from the river.
It's just a little cleanup item. I'm curious if you can direct us to the place in your written testimony where you indicate that you increased the capacity of your pen stock.
I didn't increase the capacity of my pen stock. I've replaced a section of the pen stock, upgraded it. So there was a section that was leaky, but it is not an increase in capacity.
Okay. I believe yesterday during your testimony that you mentioned that fish end up in the ditch at times.
That's correct.
So those fish that end up in the ditch, where do they subsequently end up?
They reside, from my observation, the ditch is used for habitat, refugia, and especially in the deeper sections, especially in the sections that have cover over the top. There are places where I've got protection over the ditch, and so they'll reside in areas that that is a little bit deeper than the normal flow of the ditch, and that there's cover. And that's where they reside.
And once they're in the ditch, is there any way for them to get out of the ditch?
They can easily swim back up. There's no obstructions to an outward flow.
Would that be the same under all hydrologic conditions?
The ditch is pretty constant in its flow based on our best management practices, and so they could do that at any given time.
I also like to clarify a little bit on the cost of alternative electricity sources from your testimony yesterday. I wasn't clear, so maybe you can help us. How much are you actually spending on diesel fuel on an annual basis?
I'm going to need to look at my documents if that's okay.
Sure.
I have 2016 receipts here. I don't have a total. Could run that given time, 5 minutes.
Are these receipts something that's in the record?
I'm not aware that they are.
Okay.
I can run down these numbers if you'd like.
And this is just in like monthly numbers?
Correct.
For 2016? Sure.
In 2016, December 9th, 2,781, 11/22, 2,318, 11/01, 1,392, 10/06, 1,174, 9/12, 1,559, 8/30, 1,818, 8/08, 2,098, 8/17, 1,290, 7/20, 2,173, 6/28, 1,764, 6/16, 1,496, and then my numbers stop. So I'm going to have to look at the rest of my.
Did you?
Yeah.
And
That's a half a year.
This is 2016, so this is a
is
year
correct.
where you've indicated you did not divert water from the stream during
This is correct.
the summer.
Right. No water diversion for hydro plant generation. This is running the ranch. This is a half-year figure.
Okay. Do you deduct the diesel fuel costs from your taxes?
They're an operating expense.
So does that mean you deduct them?
Yes.
I have a couple questions about your wet season diversion management. So this is Exhibit MMR 1. I think it has a small a next to it as well. No, somebody will pull it up here. Oh, there it is. For some reason, when I save the PDF, it shows MMR 1A on my file name. My fault. Can we turn to page 11? There we go. Heading 6, let's see, I can control this. All right, do you see the third sentence that begins since? Can you read that for us?
I'm not there yet. Are you able to highlight it?
Maybe.
Okay, I'm there now.
Okay. Can you read it aloud?
Since I took ownership of the ranch in 1994, I have been deepening and improving the diversion ditch by removing sediment from the ditch bed and placing that material along the berm for reinforcement. The maintenance effort has proven to be successful to avoid erosion and overtopping.
By deepening the diversion ditch, have you increased its capacity?
The capacity is determined at the point of diversion by how much I entrain at the head. The successful conveyance is dependent on the amount of freeboard and the stability of the berm. So my efforts in the body of the ditch line to reinforce the berm by removing accumulated sediment doesn't affect captured water. It affects the amount of water that can be safely conveyed without failure of the berm.
So how do you know that you haven't increased the capacity at the point of diversion? Do you do maintenance activity there?
Well, the point of diversion is an evolutionary thing. It changes season by season because it's a primitive rock and rubble berm that evolves from high flow season through low flow season. So how do I know that I haven't captured more water than what the ditch can carry?
No, that's not my question. How do you know you haven't increased the capacity of the amount of water you can divert?
Because in 25 years of operation, the amount of water available at the downstream sections that are fixed and more stable has not overtopped. I haven't exceeded its capacity. The capacity of my hydro plant has been actually diminished when I improved the power plant from the larger World War II era generator. The anecdotal observations, which I can line out, but primarily based on fixed points in the ditch, which have remained the same historically over 2.5 decades.
But you can't actually measure the amount of water that's being diverted. Is that correct?
I've already answered that I can measure it using those points along the ditch where I have SWRCB measurements and where I have a culvert that's been there for the 25 years I've been there with measurement points on it. So when we bought the ranch 25 years ago, there was a culvert at a crossing where an access road goes over the ditch. That culvert is a 24-inch culvert, hasn't been replaced, has a fixed capacity. I put measurements on it soon after we arrived at the ranch, and I've watched how much water flows by that point as an easy accessible point to see how much water is in the ditch. It is a arbitrary unit of measure I call Stanshall units, but it is it's a point of management that I use to observe how much water is in the ditch. So improving maintenance or conveyance efficiency, improving stability of the ditch is the goal of what I'm doing. Incidental increase in conveyance capacity, I don't think is possible based on work that I'm doing mid-ditch when I have limiting point of capture and also limiting point of consumption and passage at several points along the ditch.
At each of those points, though, there's not an actual measurement of how many CFS are traveling down the ditch.
There is a Stanshall unit measurement that I installed when we first moved there.
Right, I understand that. That's
Yeah.
not my question.
So
Actual CFS, ability to measure actual CFS in the ditch.
there is the
You don't
ability
do
if you
that,
convert
but you
those
don't do
Stanshall
that.
units or do the SWRCB measurements and convert velocity to flow.
yesterday you mentioned that after storms you go to dig out material from the ditch.
I did mention that.
And if you failed to do this in a timely manner after storms, what would happen?
As I mentioned, the ditch acts as a natural and training device to capture sediment normally carried in Stanchaw Creek. So without removing the debris, the first thing that happens is the top end of the ditch line, most close to the point of diversion, will capture the larger rubble. That remains in place and impedes the capturing of water into the ditch so that the main body of Stanchaw Creek continues downstream towards the main Klamath. If I don't go up and clean out the ditch as it fills up, the ditch becomes occluded and won't capture any water at all. So not removing sediment is a maintenance issue if I want to have drinking water. It's a density gradient, the ditch line, just like a sluice box would be if you were a miner. So the larger, denser material gets entrained at the head of the ditch, the farther downstream you go.
I understand that. And you testified to
Okay,
that
so that
yesterday.
it
I
stops
think
the ditch functioning.
you've actually answered the
Okay.
question. All right, let's turn to Exhibit WR 83. And these are the notes from the December 14th, 2017 meeting. Can you explain to me why the Lenihan report was prepared?
Sure. Earlier attempts to gain funding to do improvements on the ranch, such as the 2004 proposal to completely pipe the ditch and the return flow to the main body of the Klamath River above the anadromous stretch, were prohibited because funders were under threat of lawsuit if they funded a project which didn't have a verified water right. And so there was an effort in order to enable funding for improvements for physical solutions that we had to have a independent third party visit the topic of water rights in order to enable funders to successfully fund projects. This was an example of our early on ongoing cooperation with stakeholders to look for solutions. This in fact failed because at the time when we had this short window of opportunity to...
I didn't ask that.
Okay.
I asked what was the purpose of the report, and I think
Yeah,
you answered that.
try to get a statement from an independent, non-vested party in an analysis of our water right so that we could obtain funding to find physical solutions.
Okay, thank you. And at the time that this meeting had the state issued an opinion regarding the scope of your right?
I'm not aware that they had.
Okay. So if we can go to Bates 2475 on this exhibit, which I don't know the internal pagination number of it. Looks like it's going to be about the 5th or 6th page. I can scroll too. It seems like I have control. So this is Bates 2475. We were looking at this yesterday also. So there's sorry, I don't know if it's Taro or Taro. My apologies. But he says we can render an opinion, staff finding in the matter. That's what we intend to do. So that's, just to be clear, that's what I just asked, whether the state had made an opinion at that point, and his answer seems to be that it has. But based on what he's saying here, it seems that they hadn't. So just for context, I just want to read it quickly. Oh my God. This will work better.
Central Valley Board's already a little grumpy, so try not to break anything.
Sorry. I knocked the screen over again. State Water Resources Control Board says that there's a pending complaint currently. A likely next step would be investigation report, as there's was in 1998 and 2002. I'd expect to be able to make findings on whether there would be an enforcement action. This would determine the level of pre-1914 right. Get concerns about Martha's report to the State Water Resources Control Board now. We'll probably make a report in the next few months. So what's Martha's report?
What is Martha's report?
Yeah.
It's her analysis of the extent of our pre-1914 water right and that whether or not it was a valid water right at all.
So is that Martha's report? Is the Lenahan report?
Martha Lenahan is the full name, so Martha is Martha Lenahan.
Okay, thanks. Barbara, which I believe is Barbara Brenner, did the Water Board not yet have the opportunity to comment on the report, presumably referring to Martha's report? Would you agree with that?
That sounds like that's the correct context.
Right, and then Taro says, this is the first time we've had a chance to look at the report. Again, we're talking about Martha's report.
Mm-hmm.
And Barbara says, we're still of the opinion this is a 3 CFS water right. The question is, can we agree to some kind of physical solution? Taro says, I don't think we can get to the final stage without us giving an opinion. Conrad says, what do NFWF and NOAA need to fund a solution? Or is NFWF and NOAA the funders that you were referring to when you're describing the purpose of the Lenahan report? Was to provide a figure so that
Yeah,
the funders...
As I'm recalling, those were two of the potential funders.
Okay. And then Bob says, Bob is with NOAA, I believe. Is that true?
I don't know.
Well, we'll correct that in a second. But anyways, Bob says, we need a number to move forward with a solution. We don't want to revisit in 10 or 15 years. We have money set aside. We need a number that's going to make everyone feel comfortable. And then Doug says, and that's you, what's wrong with the number in the report? Are you referring to the Lenahan report when you say this?
I probably was at that point.
Would you agree that at this point this suggests you are agreeing to move forward with the solution that provided you with the water amount identified in the Lenahan report?
My position has always been that the bottom line for me is the physical survival of Marble Mountain Ranch fiscally and the environmental survival of the resources. There is common ground there. If money is available to do remediation for whatever the project of the day is that makes the resource preserved, and we are preserved fiscally and with our business and family heritage, that's acceptable. If the funding from NOAA and NIFWIF is dependent on a number from the Lenahan report that is acceptable and can allow for the survival of my business, any number is acceptable. If NOAA and
Okay,
NIFWIF can
okay.
fund,
I
you understand what I'm
I
saying?
understand.
The bottom line is our survival, regardless of whatever number that is.
So just yes or no, do you agree that this suggests you are agreeing to move forward with the solution that provided you with the water and the amount identified in the Lenahan report?
Yes, presuming funding's available for and improvements are made.
Thank you. So do you recall the diversion rate described in the Lenahan report, whether
I
it
do not
included
at this
ditch
point.
losses?
I do not at this point.
Can we bring up water rights 80 exhibit? And turning to Bates pages, if I have control. I don't. Oh, I do. 25, let's see, 2430 and 2431. this looks like it's a section on the conclusion. So the question was, do you recall whether the diversion rate described in the Lenahan report included ditch losses? And if you look at the sentence that goes from page 2430 to 2431, it says the pre-1914 appropriative water right supports diversion and use of up to 0.35 CFS for domestic and irrigation, 0.31 CFS for power generation, plus reasonable losses in the range of 0.5 CFS for a total water right of 1.16 CFS. Does that help you recall whether the Lenahan report discussion of the diversion rate included ditch losses?
Well, that sentence does mention ditch losses, yes.
So and in the quantification of the water right, they included the ditch losses of 0.5 CFS.
Can we go back to the sentences prior to that?
Sure. Take your time. How about we start? You can.
Yeah.
Let me know if you need me to scroll.
On balance, the documentation provided supports the conclusion that there is a viable pre-1914 appropriative water right that has and continues to be exercised on the Marble Mountain Ranch. However, there was a period from the I'm sorry.
Can you repeat the question pending?
Yeah, I'm going to let Doug finish reading and then I'll ask him if that's okay.
Okay, go ahead.
So do you feel like you have the context now?
Yeah, I do.
Okay. So the question was whether the Lenahan report's quantification of the water right included ditch loss.
It does mention ditch loss.
And it mentions it as how much?
A half a CFS.
Okay. So according to the Lenahan report, the total beneficial use would be 0.66 CFS.
Under that analysis, that's what she's stating.
Okay. Can I take excuse me, Mr. Moore? Can I take just one moment to confer with my client?
Yes, you may. Let's stop time.
I think this will be the last of it. So, did you not propose a schedule and a process for moving forward to comply with the cleanup and abatement order?
I'm not sure I can identify which cleanup and abatement order and what my response has been. Can you, apparently you've got a response you want to bring up. Can you?
No, I don't actually. I don't. It's just I wanted to know something just generally related to it, not specific to a document. But let me get the number of the cleanup and abatement order. It was issued by the regional board.
Okay.
Do you know which one I'm talking about now? Is there some other cleanup and abatement order that I'm not aware of related to your
To be honest
operations?
with you, there's been so much dialogue back and forth. I don't recall exactly which document you're talking about.
Okay, well, did you propose a schedule in order to comply with directions from the regional board about what needed to be done?
Can I consult with my counsel on this? Because I'd like to give you an accurate answer. Okay. I would presume that we did. I don't recall exactly.
Have you set out a schedule for addressing the complaints that the regional board has made regarding the condition of your ditch and fixing those problems?
I'm remembering a proposal which was rejected by the water board.
Okay. But you didn't make. Did you make commitments to do something in order to address what the water board wanted you to do? You made a proposal.
I'm recalling that we made a proposal and made some improvements, and that our most recent, all I'm remembering is that our most recent proposal has been rejected by water board.
Okay. So, and in terms of complying with what the water board wants you to do, are you on schedule with that?
I don't think that I am in compliance with what water board wants.
And
It's
and
impossible
why
for me.
is that?
It's impossible for me to meet most of the requirements. Some of them I can and have met, and others I haven't. It's impossible for me to meet.
Okay. Let's take a look at back to MMR 1. And this is it. I just want to quickly understand what this says. It's not totally clear to me about in section 8, which begins on page 13 of the document. It says continuing diversion improvement efforts. And in the second sentence, no, first sentence, last clause, well, you're describing that these are the projects that you plan to complete. And it says, provided the outcome of the public hearing results in the continued use of my full pre-1914 3 CFS water right. What will you do if it doesn't result in that?
So, are you asking me what I will do if I cannot? I'm sorry. Can you repeat your question?
Well, I'm just trying to understand what you mean when you say that you plan on completing a number of projects, provided the outcome of the public hearing results in the continued use of my full pre-1914 3 CFS water right.
Presuming I have access to use the full 3FS, which is what's required for me to operate the hydroelectric plant in the winter, I would continue to make ongoing improvements in the ditch so that it is more stable. I would pipe sections of the ditch. I would prefer not to pipe the entire ditch for reasons I mentioned previously about sediment conveyance in a pipe. So my approach has been spot reinforcements and repairs to the ditch line, improvements to the hydroelectric plant, improvements to the ranch, electrical infrastructure to become more efficient. All these things would be happening were I not distracted by trying to fund defensive maneuvers in court and hiring consultants to provide analyses of sediment loading in the ditch and neighboring drainages. My resources are redirected to other areas right now rather than improvements to the infrastructure of the ranch and the ditch conveyance capacities. So presuming that there's a resolution that can come to fruition with Water Board, and presuming we have an agreed allowance to run the hydroelectric plant and stop I'm going to use the word persecution, and so please don't take offense to that, but that's the sense that I have and the feeling that we have as a family and business. If I'm allowed to do my job as a facility manager and steward of this resource, my intent is to continue to improve our operations so that our impact in the resource is minimized. It's to my benefit in my business to have a successful resource in the area as much as it is to any other individual that resides in the area or in the larger human population. I want this resource to be preserved as much as Water Board does, as much as Karuk Tribe does, as much as Old Man River. This is my home. My intent is to improve the resource. In order for me to do that, I have to be enabled fiscally and emotionally and with personal energy to make that happen. And that's my intent when I say, presuming this comes to a successful fruition, then that's my plan. That's what I have been doing prior to all of this and what I intend to continue. My willingness to cooperate has been made clear.
Okay, thank you. Those are all the questions I have.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Hunt. Next, invite Old Man River Trust to ask questions under cross-examination.
Mr. Cole, before you purchased Marble Mountain Ranch, had you had experience living off the grid or maintaining diversions from creeks?
No. I lived in an urban setting, but had my profession in the wilderness as a outfitter and guide. However, I did not reside in an off-grid situation.
Okay, and before that, had you stayed at a business, like a tourist business or any form of hospitality business that existed off of the power grid?
I may have, but I can't say for certain.
Before you purchased the property, did you evaluate other such properties off the grid to see what it entailed?
I wasn't in the market to purchase Marble Mountain Ranch when we first were solicited to purchase the property. We were using the facility for a number of years as a whitewater rafting outfitter, and so we became familiar with it in the course of outfitting and guiding out of Young's Ranch Resort. So does that answer your question?
I think so. I'm just trying to get an idea of how much you investigated what it takes to run a gravity water system and a hydropower system off the grid before you decided to spend the money to purchase the property.
I didn't investigate anything at all for hydroelectric generation. Knew nothing about it at all.
Okay. And how about of the specific property before you purchased it? Did you evaluated the hydro system, maybe did you ask any third parties what they thought of it, about the practicality of it?
No.
And same question for the water conveyance system. Did you ask any third parties if this method of diversion was either in keeping with the local norms or practical from a management standpoint?
No.
The cost estimates you mentioned yesterday, $500,000 for solar, that is based on a presumed need of how much power?
I'm assuming you're asking about Housekeeper's sales pitch for his product, which is roughly $500,000. And that was based on his distant evaluation of what our energy needs are based on what I told him our power generation plant currently produced.
Okay. Of all the estimates in the records submitted by Marble Mountain Ranch, were they all essentially based on the starting point of your stated need of power output?
I wouldn't solicit an estimate for anything less than what we were currently using.
Okay, I'm trying to decipher between your stated need versus actual. You've also said you don't measure yesterday that you don't measure power use at your houses. So I'm trying to get at actual need as opposed to perhaps stated need.
In the case of Housekeeper, as I recall, he asked me to do an appliance summary, taking a look at amperage requirements for each of the major appliances, typical household appliance needs in the homes. And so there was a evaluation done by him to take a look at what his estimate would be to operate the ranch in its current configuration for electrical needs based on existing infrastructure. So he came up with his proposal for an installation based on those kinds of numbers.
So I'm trying to get at who is deciding the primary basic power need. The California Water Board, and its has requested that you conduct an energy audit, which I would presume means determining actual, normal, reasonable power consumption.
Yeah, this is Hal's attempt at that, and as you recall, Joey Howard also did a look at that. And so an energy evaluation, this is one version of it.
So I guess I'll go back to this question. Did Joey Howard calculate based on standard protocols or based on your statement of power need?
On a physical summary of the ranch, similar to what I did for Hal, if I can recall correctly.
Okay. Have you conducted what would be considered an energy audit as requested by the California Water Board?
Would you consider this to be an energy audit?
It depends, honestly, on who determines needs by. In the same way we calculate consumptive water needs based on this is standard per household, it's the same goes for energy.
So I would reply, we did do that, and the efforts of Joy Howard, Hal Slater, and the electrician, 3 individuals who've looked at the ranch, the needs of the ranch, the consumptive energy patterns, the distribution on the ranch. So I would call that an energy audit.
Okay. What's the manufacture date on the Pelton wheel you currently use?
I don't know when it was manufactured.
Roughly.
We installed it roughly 20 years ago.
Okay, so it's about 20 years old. And the maximum output of the Pelton wheel, I think you said, was 40 kW?
Yes. That's based on the generator that it's attached to right now.
Okay, when you chose to upgrade this, I know you spent a lot of money. Did you consider a system that would have had a battery bank and higher efficiency in terms of water use per power output?
20 years ago, battery technology was pretty inefficient for storage. That wasn't even a consideration. We looked for a hydroelectric plant that fit the system and was appropriate for the needs at the moment.
By fit the system, you mean utilize current point of diversion?
Available head to drive a generator.
And who determined available head?
Who determined?
How do you
the
determine?
head is an existing piece.
How do you determine available head?
You take a vertical measurement from the top to the bottom of a pipe, and you measure the diameter of the pipe and the available flow moving into the penstock, and you can create a hypothetical energy production based on how much kinetic energy can be transferred down that system. So imagine a straw. You have a skinny straw that's filled to the top of 12 inches. You can produce so much power. You lengthen the straw, you can produce more power. You widen the straw for the same width, you can produce more power. The kinetic energy is going to be dependent on the volume of flow and the head pressure, which is determined by the elevation from top to bottom of the penstock.
So elevation from top to bottom of the penstock. If you look at this map, there's a dot for the current point of diversion and a potential point of diversion. Would the potential point of diversion provide you with considerably more head?
Can you
What can-
please identify what you're referring to?
This
You need to identify it, not just by
Exhibit
this.
1, OMRT 1.
I can see potential point of diversion. Conrad, you need to understand that I will never agree to relocating the point of diversion another 1,000, 2,000 feet up and reinstituting a new intrusion with new ditch lines and unstable conveyances and new access roads. I will never go there. And this ditch in its current location has been stabilizing for 150 years. A minimal impact is got to be a piece of the solution. An intrusion like this is beyond comprehension for me. I don't want to go there.
Okay, can we speak about impacts for a minute
Sure.
on my diversion and my property? You said in your previous testimony that the ditch captures rubble that would otherwise flow down Stanshaw Creek.
It does.
Does it catch rubble infinitely, or does that rubble sometimes get released?
I'm not sure the question you're asking. Does it capture rubble infinitely?
It captures rubble. I assume the rubble stacks up.
Correct.
Does it stack up forever, or does it sometimes get released into the creek?
It'll be the same as any piece of Stanshaw Creek drainage. It'll fill up to a point. Imagine a riffle in Stanshaw Creek. Gravel's going to fill it up, and then it'll be blown down to another spot lower, and then it'll fill up. So as slides happen alongside of the Stanshaw drainage, there's an infinite amount of gravel and sand and sediment that can be put into Stanshaw Creek. So does it capture gravel infinitely? I would say yes, because there's an infinite amount of sediment that can be captured in Stanshaw Creek.
We're talking about the ditch versus the creek. Are you aware of mudslides that have occurred in the winter, sending a plume of mud down the creek into my water system and into the Klamath River?
Stanshaw Creek has regular sloughs under every single winter year. When I go to maintain the ditch and shut it off in anticipation of a storm, I can at times see, looking downstream and on the opposite side of the river, entire hillsides that have moved. Stanshaw Creek routinely flows muddy. It routinely carries sediment. I've made that point over and over again. There's an infinite amount of, yes, there's infinite sediment that it carries, and it happens naturally regardless of the ditch existence.
The video that was shown on Monday showed evidence of historic mudslides on the ditch into Stanshaw Creek.
It did not show mudslides entering into Stanshaw Creek.
Okay, I guess we would characterize what we saw differently. A break in the ditch with a plume of mud going down, I would consider a mudslide. When the mouth of Stanshaw Creek looks like you see in the photo, have you ever examined the mouths of other creeks at times when this is occurring?
I've lived on the Klamath for 25 years. As I drive the highway in a large storm, I see muddy creeks all up and down the highway. Stanshaw, T-Bar, every single tributary will flow muddy given the right storm.
Driving down 96, or being at your house, I'm not certain that's possible. When the mouth of a creek looks like what you see in this photo, have you actually gone to the mouth of Sandy Bar Creek or Irving Creek or any other creeks?
When I've seen Stanshaw muddy, have I gone to other creeks? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, to see what impact your diversion may be having relative to other watersheds.
I'm not sure what Stanshaw Creek's impact has on other creeks' watersheds.
I'm
It's
speaking
confluence.
to the impact of your diversion ditch on Stanshaw Creek. The photo shows a washout from your ditch filling the Klamath River with mud at a time when the other.
It doesn't show that.
Okay. At the time this happens, go ahead. At the time this happens, have you or have you not examined other creeks to see if they look the same way?
Conrad, I see mudslides routinely on Stanshaw Creek, regardless of whether they're creek right, creek left, up ditch, down ditch. Stanshaw Creek is a high gradient stream. It always has mudslides and it always will have mudslides. And I capture that mud in my ditch on occasion if I don't shut the ditch off.
Okay.
So my ditch gets shut off in high flow scenarios to prevent overtopping. When you see mud entering the Klamath River from Stanshaw Creek, that mud is a naturally occurring slide in the drainage of Stanshaw Creek. My ditch is off.
One more question. When there's mud going out of the mouth of Stanshaw Creek, have you walked above your diversion and below to see where the mud is actually coming from?
I have to say that when Stanshaw Creek is flowing like that, I stay as far away as possible from getting in Stanshaw Creek. It's fairly risky.
So no, you haven't been able to check.
I
to
have not
verify.
walked up Stanshaw Creek in flood stage.
Okay.
Mr. Fisher, could you identify the exhibit you have up on the screen just for the record?
Yes. If the mouse worked, I could. Here. OMRT 5.
Thank you.
Are you aware of the impact? You stated in your earlier testimony that to manage the ditch, to manage your diversion, you must sometimes cease diverting completely to maintain the ditch. Is that right?
I do.
And does that sometimes happen in the summer and the winter, or mostly summer?
And
What does that happen all times of year? Is that required all times of year?
It's not required all times of year as far as to prevent overtopping, but I do shut it off periodically for maintenance.
Okay. Are you aware of the impact that has on my downstream diversion that it has had in the past when you shut off the diversion, thereby increasing the flow rapidly?
I thought your diversion was from a tertiary point off the side of
2 points of diversion, one from the main stem, one from the tributary.
Okay. I have not consulted with you. When I shut the ditch off, my agenda is to maintain the ditch and to prevent erosive events.
When I have told you there's mud coming out of my kitchen sink as a result of your management, how have you responded?
Can you prove to me that mud from your kitchen sink has arrived from my ditch?
Can you prove that it hasn't?
Excuse me.
Do you have a question?
I'm asking how-
Arguing with the witness.
It's about more, it's getting to corrective actions and remedies that would meet both of our needs as water right
I'm not
holders.
asking the purpose of the question. I'm asking what is the question?
Are you aware that when you cease diverting completely, particularly in the summer and the flow of Stanshaw Creek increases exponentially, that it adversely impacts downstream diversions?
That was asked and answered.
Back to my initial question, are you aware of the impact on downstream diversions when you cease diverting rapidly?
I have not ceased diverting in graduated increments other than to, let me explain the process of how I shut the ditch off, and maybe that'll give you some insight. First step is to go to my most downstream weir, which is used as a flow control point, and remove the freeboard boards which entrain the ditch water. So there is a partial exit of ditch water at that point. I then walk upstream, do the same thing at the second weir, and then move upstream to the point of diversion and move rocks into the ditch out of the berm to stop water there. That process to completely shut off the ditch is about probably 45 minutes to an hour process by the time I get into the ditch and move enough rocks to stop the flow. So on that point, if that's considered an instantaneous shut off, that's what I do.
During the forest fire last summer, did the U.S. Forest Service fill its trucks on your land using water diverted from Stanshaw Creek?
They did
And was that out of your ditch or out of the pond?
all of the above.
Do you know where that fire started?
I do not. Which fire are we talking about?
The
I
fire
know-
that happened last summer?
Hay Press fire,
No, the marble fire that happened last summer.
I do not.
You're not aware where it started? Okay. Are you aware of how it started?
Nope.
Are you aware that it burned the upper portion of my water system?
It burned my water system as well, Conrad.
Okay. Is there an investigation to determine how that fire started?
There was,
Is it completed?
yes.
When determining her consumptive water use, when determining consumptive water use in her report, where did Martha Linehan arrive at the number for irrigated acres? Where did Martha Linehan get her estimate for irrigated acres to come to her calculation for consumptive water use?
I can't speak for Martha Linehan.
Her report assumes 40 acres of irrigated alfalfa. You don't know where she got that number?
I can provide hearsay or conjecture on this point, how she did her evaluation. I don't recall. I don't know.
Do you know where historic water use occurred pursuant to the Stanshaw mining claim?
I'm going to object to continued line of questions on historic pre-1914 water rights. It's not at issue in this hearing.
Can you explain why this line of questioning is relevant?
It relates to historic versus current water use and the reliance on a ditch that in Marble Mountain Ranch's statements is carrying a level that is in keeping with what was historically diverted for mining. So the capacity of their ditch, if it is based on the full use of Sam Stanshaw's original allotment, it would have been constructed differently than if it was only for a portion of or none of the Stanshaw allotment. It's about the capacity of the ditch.
I'm struggling to see
Okay.
the connection to the key issues of this proceeding.
Okay. So In the considerable analysis that has gone into corrective actions or remedies, and during this period of cooperation, have any of the third-party reports evaluated standalone solar systems or, again, hydro systems that rely on less water and higher head?
Can you be more specific? Third-party reports?
Any of the reports that are in the record for this hearing that speak to hydro power production and water consumption, Cascade Stream Solutions or the Linehan report or any of the ones submitted to this record?
I'd still object as vague.
Try again. Try to phrase that question a little more directly, so that to
Okay.
facilitate an answer.
Mr. Cole, do you recall our conversation the day before the meeting in Orleans that was referenced in the previous testimony?
Can you give me a date of the Orleans
I'm looking
meeting?
for it right now.
Are you talking about the 12/17/2014 meeting, or the stakeholder meeting?
Yes.
Okay.
Do you recall our discussion approximately 24 or 40 hours before that about whether we could agree to 3 classifications of potential remedies: standalone solar, hydro using current point of diversion, and hydro using a higher point of diversion? Those 3 general.
I remember you sent me a document with your proposals trifurcating some sort of a energy systems.
Do you remember us?
I don't remember.
Okay. Do you remember us meeting and going for a long walk, and ultimately talking about 3 paths of solutions that we had agreed to
I
put
remember.
forward at that?
Yes, I remember going on a walk with you.
Do you remember tentatively agreeing to that we would both agree to 3 solutions: standalone solar, hydro using current point of diversion, and hydro using higher point of diversion, and that we would go into the meeting in Orleans with that shared agreement?
My position then and now has always been any solution that protects the resource and enables Marble Mountain Ranch survival is an option to consider, whether it's one of your 3, or any other solution. That's my bottom line. I'm less concerned about the technicalities of it. It has to be a manageable system. Whatever physical solutions come in place has to minimize the impact. I'm not going to move the point of diversion higher up as per your suggestion. So that leg of your trifurcation of solutions is out, in my opinion. Again, preserve the resource, easily manageable and long-term viability. Marble Mountain Ranch survives, and anything is on the table.
And in this list of requirements for a proposed solution, where does my exercise of my water right, my livelihood come in? The impact on my downstream.
Sorry. I'm going to object on it outside the scope of this hearing.
Within the reasonable use doctrine, is it relevant whether a diversion impedes other beneficial uses and users of water?
Yeah.
I'll allow the question in terms of, narrow the question so it can be a yes or no, or,
Okay.
Something, be straightforward in the
Okay.
question.
You've listed the parameters that you'd require for a proposed solution. How would you also address protecting downstream beneficial uses and users of water?
Unfortunately, Conrad, one of those answers is that by utilizing hydro plant generation on Marble Mountain Ranch, a downstream user at Blue Heron can survive. Removal of hydro plant generation eliminates that downstream user's capacity to utilize their permitted and authorized hydroelectric plant. I have nothing against your survival, Conrad. My point of concern in this hearing is whether or not I've been accused of wasteful use of the water. And in my opinion, how you survive is outside the scope of this hearing. I hope you do survive. I hope you can find a way to find a viable source of water for your operations. That doesn't have an impact on what we're discussing here today.
How I survive is outside the scope of this hearing. Okay, is infringement upon other legal users of water and in-stream uses of water outside the scope of this hearing?
Conrad, I'm being accused of wasteful use of water. That's what this hearing is about.
I'm trying to get...
I'm going to object. This line of questioning has just become an argument between two parties.
Now, while I'm empathetic to the objection, I will remind everyone here that in any proceeding with respect to waste and unreasonable use or unreasonable diversion, and et cetera, the downstream water users' interests are relevant.
Okay. Then I'll expand. Wait for a question. Okay. Ask me a question, Conrad.
What remedies would you propose to protect my ability to divert water for domestic use, fruit trees, and to protect in-stream beneficial uses of water from your diversion?
I'm not understanding how my diversion impacts your survival or your operation there, so I have a difficult time answering that. Mud in Stanchak Creek is not caused by the diversion at Marble Mountain Ranch. A lack of water to you is, if I have bypass flows at the diversion, you have water at your diversion.
From our conversations over the last 20 years, are you aware of the impact of, one, diverting the vast majority of Stanchak Creek, or two, rapid fluctuations of your diversion when you maintain your ditch, or rapid fluctuations toward the beginning of the summer when you fortify your diversion, thereby decreasing flows rapidly in Stanchak Creek when there are fish in it? Are you aware of those impacts?
I do recall you calling me and asking that I not divert so much water because you were having a swim party at the refugio pool and you wanted to make sure there was sufficient water for the swim party. I do recall a phone call where you said that the ditch was creating mud in the stream, and what was I doing when Stanchak Creek was flowing muddy above the diversion and below the diversion, and I was capturing muddy water as well. So many of the times when you've accused me of creating muddy water, I have also been trying to filter muddy water, which is why I have designed a system to shut off my ditch to allow major storm pulses to pass before I have to capture water. That's what my storage system is about, so that I can live for a brief period on unmuddied water. I would suggest that you invest in a storage system as well, and that your intake system has something equivalent to what I've designed. That would be an intake system with a filter system and some sort of storage device. I'd be happy to talk with you about that and show you what I've got going if that would help you.
And how would you propose accommodating hydropower production on both lands, yours and mine?
I don't know anything at all about producing hydropower generation on your property other than that you want to establish it. What's available, I'm limited by what I can do at my point of diversion by my survival and by minimum bypass flows. What you have available for you at Old Man River, I hope you can succeed. I'm not in a position to offer editorial on it.
Would you agree that the bypass reach of Stanchak Creek used by a hydro system of yours and a hydro system of mine would be relevant to a potential remedy? By bypass reach, I mean point of diversion and point of return flow for a hydro system. Is that not relevant? Which bypass reach you have versus which one I have, is that not relevant to a proposed remedy?
Well, the first remedy we had, which was to pipe all of our effluent back to the anadromous stretch, would have provided you 2.5 to 3 CFS of water pressurized at probably 120 PSI, and you could generate more power than I do. That system was lost when that grant was, when that grant application failed. Again, I have no problem with anything you do for your survival. And I'm happy to, yeah.
By bypass reach that you're currently using, I'm referring to this point of diversion,
Can you
Which is,
state the exhibit number, please?
OMRT1 again, sorry. The current bypass reach you use, Mr. Cole, correct me if I'm wrong, is this the current bypass reach you use, this point of diversion, returning to Irving Creek?
I can't see topographical elevation lines on this, but I would presume that it is if you've gone ahead and done that.
Okay.
We're roughly at 1,200 feet.
For there to be 2 hydro systems on this creek without adversely impacting this stretch of creek on my land, which is the where anadromous fish use, would you not agree that this is the bypass reach that must be shared is that which is above Highway 96? Or bypass reaches that must be shared are above Highway 96?
I'm sorry, the question is vague. I'm not understanding your question. Could you repeat it or reword it? I'm not following.
Okay,
you.
again, this is getting to potential remedies and protection of uses. So my question is, okay, which bypass reach do you currently use, Mr. Cole? Where does it begin?
Well, the point of diversion is marked on your map. I would presume that you would have ability to utilize riparian water rights, or you could make an application for appropriative water rights and use the main stem of Stanshaw or this tributary which comes in downstream of my point of diversion and before the anadromous stretch.
Okay.
So hypothetically, there appears to be about 3/4 of a mile worth of water and head that you could use to generate some hydro plant system for yourself based on either the main tributary of Stanshaw or that secondary leg which we see. The details of that, other than what I'm seeing on the map here, I can't do anything but offer conjecture on.
You said earlier if you had gotten the grant to return the flow to Stanshaw Creek, is it correct that your bypass reach would have, would your bypass reach have been from the current point of diversion to the highway had that grant come through? Again, bypass reach is the portion of creek that has less water as a result of a hydro system.
I'm sorry. I'm not understanding the actual question.
What's the current bypass reach right now?
Of whom?
Of Marble Mountain Ranch's hydro system.
Bypass reach, I'm guessing your definition of that is the length of the tributary downstream of our point of diversion. Is that what you're saying?
Again, my definition is that, the portion of the creek that has less water as a result of a non-consumptive hydro use. That's the bypass reach. So if you return it, then the bypass reach would be at the point of diversion and the point of return flow. That's the bypass reach.
Okay, so had that grant been approved, you would have had all of our hydro plant effluent piped back to your property, and you could have installed a hydroelectric plant that would have been higher pressure and more head. You would have had more capacity to generate electricity than Marble Mountain Ranch. So the bypass reach question, I don't know how to answer that.
Okay.
Is that what you're, because yes, you would have had that been approved, beneficial use on top of, you would have robbed Blue Heron of their beneficial use, but you would have gained beneficial use at your location.
Is it true that under this scenario, my bypass reach would have been limited to Highway 96 to the mouth of Stanshaw Creek?
No, it would have been rerouted through the piping system.
What would my bypass reach have been if I built a hydro system after you were able to install the proposal? My bypass, again, it's back to what my bypass reach would have been under this proposed solution.
If we're talking a hydroelectric plant at Old Man River, you would have been able to install one at the end of the return pipe.
Which is, yes or no, at The confluent at the where Stanshaw Creek meets Highway 96.
It's above that. It's above the anadromous stretch.
Okay. For clarification, your return flow would have been roughly where Stanshaw Creek crosses the Klamath River.
Upstream of it,
Okay.
above the anadromous stretch.
Yes, yes or no? Under this scenario, my bypass reach would have had to dewater the portion of the stream on my land that is coho habitat.
No,
Okay.
bypass flows from my point of diversion would have been maintained. The water returning to Stanshaw, the water that we diverted would have been returned to Stanshaw above the point of anadromy. So your refugial pool would have been renovated or rejuvenated by the flows. That was the purpose of the return.
Where would my point of diversion be under this scenario?
I don't know how to answer this question.
Is it true that my point of diversion could not have been any higher than your point of return flow?
I'm going to object to this line of questioning, continue line of questioning. It's not an issue. It's beyond the scope of anybody's testimony.
Okay, that's fine. I would ask.
I'll sustain the objection this time. And the reason is, you know, it feels like you're doing a pop quiz, you know.
Okay.
Okay, answer this question. You know,
So
is the point of
yes, I apologize. I'm trying to get at proposed remedies, and this has been going on for nearly 2 decades. So like that's all. Trying to get at proposed remedies.
Yeah, but
I-
we're referring to something that was, you know, that was a proposal 13 years ago, I think.
2004.
Right. And so these are hypotheticals.
Okay,
I'm struggling to
Do you
see-
have any new proposals newer than this one to meet that would satisfy
Satisfy what? Meet what?
downstream water rights and in-stream beneficial uses?
Are you saying a new hydropower use for you? Talking about a new use?
In part, a new use, and also existing domestic uses, and also in-stream beneficial uses for fisheries.
Well, you've been talking about hydropower.
Okay.
So what are you asking for?
You said the Cascade Stream Solutions report, or solution is old. I am asking what solutions you would propose. Let's make it broader. What solutions are you willing to agree to in this proceeding? Yesterday you did say foregoing hydro use in the summer. And again, this is to meet all downstream uses, in-stream beneficial, domestic, and unexercised rights. to
Unexercised rights? What are those?
They are the rights that would ultimately build a hydro system for my land.
So you're asking for a solution for a new use?
I've been asking
Your
this.
hydro use?
I've been asking for this all along. How about this, Mr. Cole? Just to the public trust impacts.
I'm gonna again object. The issue of new hydro use on Klamath is not an issue for this hearing.
Trying a remedy that meets.
So I'm going to make a suggestion.
Yes.
'Cause it feels a little bit like a cart horse situation here.
Okay.
A lot of what you're bringing up probably is best brought up with your direct testimony
Okay.
or opening statement. That's the best I can do.
That
with
sounds
this
good.
Because
Okay.
it sounds like, you know, you're leading down a path that wasn't noticed. But I have
Yeah.
acknowledged in my comments that the downstream water rights are always pertinent to these type of discussions.
Okay.
But you are taking
That-
it in a different direction, and maybe you can provide some clarity with your direct testimony.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, I'm trying to get to proposed remedies. So, Mr. Cole, yesterday you indicated that you were willing to, I guess, are you willing to comply with the NIMS bypass flow recommendations?
I'll restate what I just said earlier. My bottom line is survival of Marble Mountain Ranch, beneficial uses continuing, minimized impact on the resources, manageable physical solutions that don't fail in the first storm or other natural events such as wildfire. So I'm looking for physical solutions that can be maintained and that have a longevity that I can predict and that are also easily managed. I don't want to change points of diversion. I don't want to install some physical solution which is going to cost a lot of money, fail in the first seasonal change. And so that's my bottom line. I have a water right that we claim for 3 CFS. I have stated previously and will state again, the exact number of what I divert for beneficial use is not the bottom line for me. The bottom line for me is, can we survive in reasonable fashion, protect the resource, and find solutions? I have been operating on the presumption that that's out there.
Yeah, I understand this is,
And they aren't mutually exclusive to you, only to the sense that they become mutually exclusive to who gets any effluent out of our hydroelectric plant, which is currently being beneficially used when we run it by Blue
yeah,
Heron.
okay. And are you willing to calculate, to divert for domestic purposes an amount limited to that which is based on state of California standard calculations that were described in earlier testimony?
I have to keep pastures green,
it's-
dust abated, laundry washed, toilets flushed, et cetera,
Right,
et cetera.
right.
That's
There's-
what I need.
There's standard calculations for each of those uses.
Yeah.
Are you willing to comply with those?
Those numbers that were generated by both ECOR and by Joy are similar,
Okay,
and I accept those. That's the standard.
okay. And again, to trying to get at remedies, what in your mind went wrong when grant money was available to have a remedy?
Which grant are we talking about?
Time period.
The grant that would have implemented the Cascade Stream Solutions proposal, a return flow, grants that would have,
2003, 2010, 2012.
I'm speaking, this was over many years, the proposal to return the flow. What went wrong with the grant proposals?
There have been there's been an ongoing effort to utilize grant monies for beneficial solutions and win-win alternatives. The first failure was the 2004 grant, which was going to return all of the hydroplant effluent to the Stanshaw Creek drainage above the point of anadromy, fully rewatering the refugial pool, and incidentally providing you with pressurized power. That failed because funders did not want to put themselves at risk of suit with funding a project which in their minds had an undetermined water right validity. That was the purpose of the Martha Lenahan report. We later then had a second substantial failure when we were trying to fund a piping of consumptive and domestic use water with a 6-inch pipe. And on the day of funding, we're informed that should we accept the money, that we would be required to relinquish any hydroplant diversions. This last hour addition to the proposal was unsatisfactory. We denied the grant based on this surprised revelation that it was going to require us to abandon our pre-1914 water right, allowing us to use hydroplant generated electricity. So, and then we had our ongoing failures with staff abandoning the grant process because of the constant issuance of cleanup and abatement orders, where Streamside Solutions left us because of their unwillingness to get involved in mitigations and litigation. Our Mid-Klamath watershed projects were abandoned because of cleanup and abatement order issues. So the regulatory process has, in a large regard, been detrimental to our process because grant funders, apparently, I didn't know this, but apparently they are, by policy, unable to fund projects which are in the middle of a cleanup order, abatement, or some sort of remediation that's.
Were you warned by the funding agencies that if this became an enforcement action, then public money would be off the table?
No, this is something that was a surprise to me as it came out.
agent-
We got cleanup and abatement orders immediately after the release of the final designation from, as I recall, it was like the day after we got the evaluation on what our water right was. Funders can't get involved in
So-
grant proposals
okay.
when we're under a cleanup and abatement order.
So can you just explain a bit more? You ultimately rejected, or you at some point rejected a proposal because it would require you to give up your 314 water right, or?
I was given a binary proposal, accept a 6-inch pipe being funded to install in our ditch line to convey domestic and consumptive water, and reject our hydro plant generation uses, or do whatever I'm going to do to improve the ditch on my own and argue for ongoing hydro plant generation and preservation of the full water right. It was an untenable situation. I can't accept, even though it was free money, it would be free money to pipe something that was a partial solution. I mean, free in the sense of I didn't have to come up with the money for the pipe, but it wasn't a full solution. And where that came from, I can't tell you.
What would have made it complete, a full solution?
Well, a consideration of the rest of the needs of the ranch, power generation. And that's my position. The hydro plant is a viable option for us, especially in high flow times. Acceptance of a funding project or a grant funding for installation of a pipe that's going to require me to abandon my winter hydro plant uses an untenable solution. Had nothing to do with you that I'm aware of.
Oh, I mean, I felt like we were trying. But thank you.
Okay.
Okay, I'm under the impression there probably won't be any more cross-examiners, but I'll just for due diligence check. Klamath River Keeper, California Sport Fishing Protection Alliance, no. PCFFA, no. So I think you could use a break.
Yeah.
And so I think, and all of us could. So what I was going to propose is you'll have the opportunity to redirect testimony after we take a 15-minute break. Okay? Thank you. You're welcome. Joy, you mentioned right for E-Corp.
J-O-E-Y.
Joey, gotcha. Thank you.
Oh, no, it's all right. Jeff is at Ecor. Joy is at Streamside Solutions. Or Cascade Solutions. Okay.
Yeah, Joey is the Joey Howard who testified on
Sure.
Monday.
Yes.
Just make sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. That was a little longer than 15 minutes. Our apologies. And thanks. We'll now reconvene the proceeding, and we'll hand it over to Ms. Brenner for redirect testimony of Mr. Cole.
Thank you. Doug, do you recall the conversations you've had regarding the Lenahan report referencing a 1.16 CFS
I do.
and the December 14th, 2017? Do I have that? No, December 17th, 2014 stakeholder meeting in Orleans.
I do recall it.
And you had, there was some conversation during that meeting regarding the 1.16 CFS, correct?
Right.
Does that rate allow Marble Mountain Ranch to function?
Absolutely not.
Were you trying to cooperate and come up with a physical solution that day as part of the stakeholder process?
Yes.
Was any number ultimately agreed to during that meeting?
No.
Did the NIMS bypass flow recommendation come after that meeting?
Yes.
During Mr. Fisher's cross-examination, you indicated that you do not travel up and down Stanchon Creek during high storm events, flood events, correct?
That's correct.
How do you know there are mudslides on Stanchon Creek during or after storm events?
Because the water coming into the ditch during those events arrives at the ditch in a muddy, sediment-carrying condition prior to its contact with our point of diversion. That's the first point. The second point is, in one occasion, while working on the point of diversion, was watching as the hillside on the opposite side of Stanchon Creek and downstream of the point of diversion sloughed in front of me at that moment. That slough is still there and remains to be inspected if Water Board wants to look at it. A third point is that I have walked the ditch at times of low flow, most recently with the inspection done by Steve Kramer, and at other times, and can observe and have observed numerous sloughs on both sides of the creek, but predominantly on the creek right side, which tends to have a steeper slope of inclination than the left bank does. So bank sloughs are observable by anybody that would choose to look at them and walk the ditch. I've seen them happen in the moment. I've seen them happen after the moment, and I've seen the effects of at times when I've been on the ditch during high flows.
During storm events and after large storm events, the Klamath River run brown?
It's probably brown as we speak. It was brown the week that I left to come up here from the recent storms, and it's a piece of my survival for fishing is working around routine muddying of the Klamath River, because I cannot fish guide with a blown river, as we call it.
Thank you. Are you able to currently comply with the NIMS bypass flow recommendation?
No,
Can you return hydro water use back to the Klamath or back to the Stanshaw?
there's no route for it to get back to Stanshaw.
You testified yesterday that in order to do that, it'd be in excess of $1 million.
Yes,
But you have agreed to the portion of the bypass recommendation of 2 CFS.
given other conditions, I can accept that.
Okay. I'm going to go back to your responses to Mr. Petrozelli yesterday. You've indicated several times the bottom line is to enable your survival. Any solution has to enable your survival at Marble Mountain Ranch, correct?
That's correct.
And some of those suggested solutions are a hybrid solar hydro system, correct?
That's correct.
Will a solar hydro system alone meet all your energy demands? Or do you need to also rely on diesel?
Diesel has to be available for maintenance times and for emergent times when a system fails. But if solar, in a hypothetical world, solar when the sun's out, i.e. summer, great. Hydro when the streams are flowing high, i.e. winter, great. They mesh together. But in reality, there's times when they don't. So I might still have to have some backup diesel.
And that hybrid solar hydro would still require you to use the hydro.
That's correct, because there's a lot of complications. One is we don't have a guarantee that there's enough capacity on the ranch to place solar panels sufficiently in number to run the system large enough that we're talking about. Secondly, we have the issue of fog and cloud cover, which diminishes the capacity of the solar plant. So there's complications that are not addressed in some of these preliminary estimates that we've presented as evidence.
So the solar installation cost could actually be more than estimated by Mr. Slater.
I would expect them to be significantly higher.
Quick administrative question. Should there be a time on the clock for this?
No.
Okay, just checking.
I would expect the actual installation to be significantly higher than what House Slater approximated for the purpose of his sale.
And there was some discussion yesterday about warranties, correct, on the solar and
Right.
batteries.
Right.
There are also additional O&M expenses associated with such a system.
I would presume so. You can't ever install something and have it be absent maintenance costs or operational costs.
And the battery system that was suggested by Mr. Slater would be contained in what?
You'd have to bring in a large cargo container, one of the shipping containers that you see, build a pad for it, establish an organizational system for the batteries in the cargo container, redistribute power lines through the ranch so that you could access the grid of the ranch from a different location rather than the existing heart of the power plant, which is in one location for both diesel and hydro plant. So he's talking about an offsite, a third power source, which it's with its own separate location.
Okay.
The integration would be fairly complicated.
The integration of the various energy
Right.
sources.
Right.
And just the integration of those various energy sources have been estimated at a minimum of another $500,000.
That's what the electrician was getting at with his proposal.
Are your efforts currently focused on lining or piping the first portion of your ditch so you can install a measuring device?
Yes.
Do you have any idea of the cost of that effort?
Everything I look at seems to be around the magic number of $500,000. I don't know why that is. And these are all numbers that people throw out with ease and seeming impunity, plan on at least $500,000. We had an engineer's proposal to look at it, and the engineer's expected costs were going to be $30,000 just for the analysis.
Just for the design?
Right.
Do you recall if that engineer's estimate was for lining of the design to line the entire ditch or just a portion?
I don't.
Okay. Would that effort require a 1600 permit, do you know?
I believe it would.
Has CDFW been issued your operation and maintenance 1600 application this last year?
No.
Does it make any sense to you to commit to a minimum of $1 million+ outlay for the electrical and solar system when you have no idea the status of your ability to use the water for hydro?
It doesn't make any sense at all. There's an open-ended, seemingly unending set of demands that are coming at me, and there's no seeming end to the issues that are here. So if I commit to $1.5 million or whatever, try to get that funded, that doesn't mean that all of the issues or concerns are going to be addressed.
You have continued disagreement with the regional board regarding the geoscientific evaluation of the ditch system?
I do. They asked that we provide a professional survey of the facility for sedimentation. We did that, and from my understanding, the water board has disagreed with his professional evaluation in spite of spending extended periods of time on the ditch and on the ranch, and his very thorough professional evaluation.
And are you referring to the Fiore report?
I am.
And how many days did Mr. Fiore spend out at the ranch?
Probably 4 or 5 full days of time walking the ditch and exploring the geology in and around, below and above the ditch.
Did he have additional people with him?
He did.
Do you recall Mr. Fiore prepared a LiDAR view of the ditch system?
I do.
And yesterday during your cross-exam, you were asked, where does any flow off the side of the pinstock go using that LiDAR exhibit Marble Mountain Ranch 12?
I recall that.
Where does that water go?
Excess flow that does not enter the penstock, when it happens, proceeds down alongside the penstock in a legacy ravine and gets captured in an overflow pond, as we call it. So any gravel or sediment that might have been picked up along that line is captured there. And then that flow proceeds on down across the back of the ranch where it enters the pond. And any remaining sediment in that flow is captured again.
Okay. Do you recall a photo of, well, let's strike that. When did you replace your water storage tanks on the ranch?
2016.
Do you recall the cost of doing that?
I have numbers here of 33,503. Those are hard costs. They do not reflect the labor to install it.
Okay. Is that considered a capital cost?
It is.
Are capital costs depreciated
They are
under the federal tax rules?
standard practices.
Okay, so let's go back to the line of questioning by Mr. Petrozelli regarding your tax returns. You
Okay.
recall that line of questioning? Who prepares your taxes?
Aldorf, a CPA.
Did at some point he suggest that you transition from a sole proprietor type accounting system to a C Corp or an S Corp?
To an S Corp, yes.
An S Corp. And that's your current accounting practices are in line with an S Corp
Yes.
system. Okay. You recall Mr. Petrozelli pointed to several line items on your 2014 to 2016 federal tax returns, correct?
Yes.
Each time he noted the amount depreciated, correct?
Yes.
So when you purchase a piece of equipment or you construct something like your filtration system, is that considered a capital asset
It
for
is.
tax purposes?
It is.
So the direct expense of that particular asset, capital asset, is not deducted in that year's tax return, correct?
That's correct.
Instead, it's depreciated over a number of years.
That's correct.
Do you recall what capital expenses you did incur in 2016 that are not deducted from your taxable income under federal tax form?
can I clarify, are you asking what other expenses we had that are in the same category of capital expenses, such as the filter system?
Yes.
Yes, we bought several horses to replace some that had aged and had to be taken out of service. We had a vehicle failure. We had to purchase a new vehicle. We did an improvement on staff housing. We purchased a mini excavator so that we could do ongoing maintenance on the ranch property. Those are all expensed out.
Those were expenses incurred that weren't
Oh, they were
fully
depreciated.
they were depreciated expenses.
Right.
Or they will be depreciated
Right.
expenses. They weren't line item expenses in your
No.
expense sheet. In order to make the record clear, you gotta wait for me to finish my question.
I'll wait.
Do you know the total of those particular capital expenditures for 2016?
Approximately $70,000.
Are loan payments for capital expenses deducted from your taxable income? In other words, you make loans on certain capital assets, correct? And those capital assets, again, are depreciated over time, correct? So the loan payments that are made on an annual basis are not deductible expenses, correct?
That's correct.
Do you know approximately how much loan payment you made during 2016 that was not deducted from your tax return?
Again, approximately $70,000.
Can you name a few of those items that didn't compile that number?
Ranch mortgage, ranch second mortgage, equipment payments, vehicles.
Do you also have medical expenses that are not deducted from your tax return?
I do.
And what are those annual payment or monthly payments?
Roughly $17,000 or $1,700.
So you have various other expenses that you incur over a year that are not reflected in your tax return.
That's correct. The tax returns as presented here are a partial picture of my finances.
You testified that the winter storm this past winter, 2016-17 winter, there was severe storm activity in your area.
I do.
Can you give just a brief summary of the major damage Marble Mountain Ranch incurred during that storm season?
Yes, we had an atypical snow event. So literally thousands of trees were blown down by a heavy snow after a long series of rains when the trees were weakened and after a long series of drought years. So we had 5 large Doug firs hit one structure, totally demolishing it. I had another large Doug fir hit one of our homes, peeling off the carport, requiring that building to be repaired and the roof to be replaced. Our barn left wing was collapsed under the weight of the snow. Doug firs lining the perimeter of our pasture were toppled, crushing fence lines on both sides of the pasture. The ditch line itself was fully impacted by downed trees. To illustrate the degree of impact, it took 3.5 hours to walk through the jackstraw mass of trees from car access point to the point of diversion. When we first went up to survey the ditch after the storm, we had turned the ditch off prior to the storm. So in our walk up to survey, it's 3.5 hour walk to go 3/4 of a mile.
So you'll need to incur capital expenses in order
Yes.
to repair those.
Yes.
And that layout of capital or that layout of finances won't be reflected in your next year's tax return. Those assets will be then depreciated again, correct?
That's correct.
Can Coho reach Marble Mountain point of diversion coming from the Klamath?
No.
Are there lakes above your point of diversion?
There are wilderness lakes above, yes. Well,
Can I just take a quick second? I think I'm done, but let me take a quick second. Just a couple more. Do you recall being asked by the California Department of Fish and Wildlife's council that a site visit by Ms. Bowl
I do.
and that she observed fish in the pond?
I do.
Do you stock that pond?
Not at the time Miss Bull was there. I have, in the 2016 year, stocked with triploid trout from the hatchery.
Prior to stocking the pond, where would the fish come from? They're not coming from the Klamath, correct?
No,
So it's not coho in the pond.
no.
I don't have anything further.
All right, thank you, Ms. Brenner. And at this time, we open the proceeding to recross-examination. We can begin with the prosecution team. A reminder that recross-examination is limited to the scope of the redirect testimony.
So, Mr. Cole, I just have one set of questions for you. Ms. Brenner wrapped up asking you about where fish would have come from, where fish in your pond would have come from prior to stocking. Do you recall that?
I do recall.
Okay. My question is, once a fish is in the pond, where would it go?
Under current configurations, it would go nowhere. There's no exit unless it goes up and enters a long set of culverts and goes out towards my pasture. Right now, there's no connectivity with any tributary.
Swimming through culverts out to your pasture, is that good habitat for fish? Is that a good?
I'm not sure what you're asking.
I think he mischaracterized his statement. He indicated there was no connectivity.
No, he indicated that there's the only potential pathway out of the pond, I think he said, is swimming through some culverts and towards your pasture. Was that correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. Would that be a good direction for a fish to swim to your pasture?
It would be a lethal thing to do.
I had a hard time hearing that.
It would be lethal if it did.
Lethal for the fish?
And difficult to do because I rerouted the lower ditch line to avoid passage through the pond to address the long series of demands for testing on effluent water, which was prohibitive and costly. So I've now got a ditch line system which comes up and has a bifurcation to take water into the pond. And then the main stem of the lower ditch line proceeds through a long set of culverts down towards the Irving Creek outfall, so that there is no flow through from the pond. There's a flow in and no flow out.
So if a fish swam into the pond, as it may have done before stocking, there's was likely no way for that fish to escape the pond and survive.
Correct?
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. Next, we're going to open up recross to National Marine Fishery Service. Yes, you may have a moment.
I just have one or two questions for you, Mr. Cole. You recall testifying on redirect that you're concerned with enabling your survival, the survival of the ranch.
I do recall that.
How do you define survival?
Not negatively adversing the operations, the finances, the essential essence of, or the general nature of the ranch. Survival under that term for me means not being forced to change business models drastically, and that the existing financial structure can be preserved.
So if compliance with state water and wildlife laws would force you to change your business model, that would mean that the ranch would not survive?
Well, you're asking for some hypotheticals here. So I consider changing my business model regularly in ways to benefit the ranch, such as, do I need to add a new service? Do I need to eliminate a service? Do I need to change capacity? All these parameters. The essential nature of a dude ranch, guide service, organic farm, those features need to be preserved. I'm not willing to, under my stewardship at the ranch, do a drastic change in business model to something that would, for hypothetical cases, take it to the green industry.
That's all I have.
Thank you. Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Still good morning, Mr. Cole.
Good morning.
You stated that fish from Stanshaw Creek get into and use your ditch and can move between your ditch and Stanshaw Creek. What happens to the fish that are in the ditch when you dewater it in anticipation of storm events or for maintenance purposes?
There are several locations where the ditch has a deeper. It's a pool, and the fish migrate there.
Okay. Is it possible that some of the fish will be flushed out of the ditch through the 2 outfalls that you described?
If they did, they would return back to Stanshaw Creek. It's direct connectivity to Stanshaw Creek. So yes, if they can get into the ditch, they can get back. If they can enter the ditch from Stanshaw, they can return to Stanshaw 3 places. At the point of diversion, at the first outfall, or at the second outfall. All those are in direct connectivity to Stanshaw Creek.
So under normal conditions, without manipulating the outfalls or the weirs, they still have the ability to get through the outfall? Or do you have to actually, for lack of a better description, lift the flashboard or open up that outfall for those fish to have access?
That would depend on the specifics of that day. There are days when there is no water flowing over the outfall, the flashboards. There are days when there is, and depends on what the flow to that point is. So there could be anywhere from 1, 2, or 3 points for fish to return to Stanshaw if they were entrained in the ditch line.
Is it conceivable, or have you experienced or witnessed, is it conceivable that some of the fish that end up in the ditch perish as a result of that quote-unquote trip into the ditch, either because they've left the outfall and there wasn't a happy return, or something in the ditch itself is caused?
I'm going to object. This hypothetical, vague.
I was asking if it's conceivable based on his experience and knowledge of the ditch.
Still, object is hypothetical.
Have you ever witnessed any dead fish in your ditch?
No.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to, so that was a rephrase of the question?
Correct.
In response to the objection? Okay,
Correct.
so I'll overrule the objection.
Thank you. Ms. Brenner made passing reference in a redirect on a permit from the Department of Fish and Wildlife for operation and maintenance of your ditch. Is it your understanding that you need a permit from the department to do maintenance work in your ditch?
My understanding is that a permit to do maintenance and work in the ditch depends on where in the ditch I'm working. So if I'm within the bed and banks or somewhere outside that realm, then the permit structure is different or absent.
Are you aware that the section in the Fish and Game Code that governs issuance of that permit, which I'll represent as Fish and Game Code Section 1602, applies to work that could in some way, generally speaking, alter a river, stream, or lake?
Yeah.
Is it your opinion that your ditch is a river, stream, or lake?
I don't know how to answer that. It's not my ditch is not a river, stream, or lake in its definition of a natural occurrence, but it does provide habitat.
Let me rephrase it. The question I'm asking is, if you did not have a permit from the department pursuant to that Fish and Game Code section that specifically authorizes you to conduct maintenance work in your ditch, do you think you're precluded as a matter of law from doing that?
My understanding is I can maintain the ditch outside the bed and bank of Stanshaw at my discretion, and my predecessors have, and I continue to do that under best management practices.
Okay, thank you. That's great. Can we queue up Exhibit WR 82? And can we go to page 6, which I believe is bait stamp number 2440? And move down just a little bit. Can I control this at this point, or yes? Okay. You mentioned your measuring culvert where you measure it, the flow and Stanshaw units. Is the maximum amount of water that you regulate at that measuring culvert 3 CFS?
I'm going to object. Goes beyond the redirect questions.
Ms. Brenner had mentioned excess flow into the pond, so I think it's within the scope of the redirect.
I mentioned where the outfall goes under certain occasions from the penstock. That's it.
These
This may be an outgrowth of the cross and not the redirect. Is there something in the redirect you can connect this line of questioning to?
it overall has to do with the ditch capacity and the function.
I didn't ask anything about the ditch capacity or function.
All right, I'll sustain the objection.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, for recross, will be the Crook tribe. Mr. Hunt? No? Okay. And next for recross will be Old Man River Trust.
Was the Linehan report conducted to resolve disputes between parties?
Objection goes beyond the scope of the redirect.
Your redirect did discuss the Linehan report.
Specifically, whether you asked specifically whether its conclusions would allow Marble Mountain Ranch to stay in business.
I asked about the 1.16 CFS discussion on 12/14/2017.
In the Linehan report.
Okay. Is this line of questioning related to the minimum flow rate,
It's related to
which she
the
asked
Linehan
about?
report. It's related to the Linehan report, whether or not its
Yeah, her
conclusions
line-
would allow him to stay in business. Okay, that's
Her line of questioning had more to do with his, understanding of those
Okay,
conclusions
you-
and the discussion at the time of a physical solution. Am I right, Mrs. Brenner? Yeah, that was really the context of that line of questioning.
Okay. So your question was, and correct me if your answer to the question posed to you, does 0.11 CFS cited in the Linehan report allow you to manage your ranch? And your answer was no. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Could you manage your ranch if you had an integrated solar and fossil fuel generator system without hydro? If you had solar and generator, or just solar?
It's a hypothetical that I don't have enough information to give you a concrete answer on.
You don't have enough info on solar systems to give an answer. Okay. Could we pull up?
I need the hydro to be operating regardless.
You have to have. Okay, so no matter what kind of solar system you have,
We need the hydro.
you
as
must have
part of it.
hydro. Must you have hydro even if you have solar and fossil fuel generator?
Yes.
Okay. Could we pull up 3 hydro? Exhibit OMRT 3. I would do it, but this mouse is not working very well.
I'm going to object to this line of questioning. It goes beyond the redirect.
Your question was specifically about circumstances under which he could stay in business, quantity of water to stay in business. This is related directly to quantity of water to preserve his business. Quantity of water necessary for hydro to preserve his business. I'll drop it if it's fine. I'll say it later.
Yeah, again, I think
That-
I'm conjecture, but I feel like you're getting into your own testimony by bringing up your exhibit.
Thank you. Okay, sorry. Do you know what kind of fish are in the portion of your ditch on Forest Service land?
Salmonids of undetermined species.
Do you know if your point of diversion in Stanshaw Creek is currently in compliance with Fish and Game Code Section 1600?
You'll have to forgive me, Conrad. I don't know what
So
1600
when
is.
Brian Boyd came out and told us you got to let water through to have fish passage, that's Fish and
It
Game
is.
Code Section 1600.
It
is?
in
Okay,
compliance.
thanks.
Okay, and I believe Klamath Riverkeeper, C-SPA, and PCFFA are not present. I keep confirming this, okay. And at this point, I would actually open it up to staff if you have any questions. Do you want to take time or? Okay, we're going to take just a moment.
Not me.
I think we're ready. So I have a couple of questions. I want to ask you first. I recall you saying yesterday that this is your first time appearing in court. Is that correct?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let me just go over what staff role is here, because it's a little different from being cross-examined by other parties who may be adverse. So we advise the hearing officer, we're neutral. We ask our questions just to, if we thought something was interesting or to fill in gaps in our understanding.
Sure.
Just so you know.
Sure.
So, and if you or your counsel have any concerns with our questions, then we'll figure out a way to ask a better question. Does that sound okay?
Yes.
Okay. I wanted to start by asking you just who visits the ranch? Where do they come from?
We have a global audience. Thanks to the modern technology of the internet, we have a reach that literally covers the globe. So a typical week at Marble Mountain Ranch might have California residents from LA, San Diego, northern residents of Oregon and Washington, so West Coast visitors. We get a lot of East Coast visitors, Chicago, Florida, and then we have almost every week some portion of visitors from the UK. The Brits, for whatever reason, are keen on the Western culture and
Okay.
cowboying up. Germany, likewise. So it's a global reach, and almost all European nations are represented in the guest profile, and to some degree, some Asian nations.
Are you competing in a global marketplace then, or primarily with local ranches?
There are not, if in the Dude Ranchers Association, those ranches, California is represented by 4 ranches out of 120, by my recollection, ranches in the association, which cover Wyoming, Montana, Colorado, and other classic Western locations.
Okay.
I compete with them, and then I compete with the global audience for other non-ranch related venues. So if somebody wants to take a cruise rather than a dude ranch, that's a competition. If they want to go to Club Med versus visit Marble Mountain Ranch, that is a global competitor. So I have ranch competition and other recreational venues of different types that are also competition.
Okay, thank you. That's helpful. You testified yesterday that you're an owner operator. You have a number of different roles on the ranch, correct?
Can you clarify?
Well, I think you mentioned you guide fly fishing. You're a
Oh,
short
right.
order cook.
Mhm.
So you regularly interact with your visitors.
That's our signature. We are one of the rare small venues with authentic Western experiences where the proprietors are face-to-face with the visiting guests, and that's our claim to fame in part. We are not a large venue. Some of the ranches, such as the Alisal near Solvang, host 200 guests. We host a small venue so that we can have that personal interaction and be what we advertise as a family-operated ranch in the true sense.
Right. Do visitors ever ask you about the ditch or the history of the ditch or the hydropower system?
It's a very interesting point to visitors. Our guests are intrigued by the very concept of being off the grid. It's an inconceivable point for a lot of people to get onto the ranch and realize that they can't turn on their cell phone. And the idea that they can be in a location with no cell coverage, with no police force, with no power grid supply, it's a novel concept which some people can't handle and say that they choose to go elsewhere. Other people consider that to be a desirable effect, and the need to disconnect is a marketing point. So where families come, they take advantage of the solitude, they become a part of the Western culture and the natural resources of that environment. The history and the the specifics of the power plant are always an intriguing point to visitors to try to understand what's happening.
Okay, so we've talked today and yesterday about it's important for you to ensure the survival of your business, to maintain its character as a dude
Right.
ranch. Is having the ditch as, it's old, it has this interesting history, do you see that as being part of the character of your ranch as a dude ranch, or is it the ditch as a way to get power and water?
Well, yes, it is a piece of the culture. I have a page on the history of the ranch on our website, which people are directed to so that they can read about the evolution of the ranch business and the related cultural changes over the last 2 centuries. So our visitors, when they come from distant locations, are getting there in the hopes of seeing and experiencing and understanding the history. The gold rush, people are fascinated by the gold rush, which is what the ditch is all about. I can take them to the last remaining mining pit, and we ride right through it on horseback. And so that's a piece of the experience, is the cultural edification and connect with the Western history and the experience there in the Klamath National Forest.
Thank you. How many hours do you work in a typical week during the visitor season?
Sun up till sundown every single day. I don't know if you can understand this without being an entrepreneur. I don't know your background, but I literally get up at 5:30 and I'm on the job until my head hits the pillow somewhere between 10:30 and 11. All of that time is in preparation for guests' arrival when they wake up and come to their first meal or activity, followed by direct guest interactions, teaching shooting at the shooting range, whitewater rafting with them on the river, leading a trail ride, instructing them in how to fly fish. So I'm in the public eye and on the job from the minute my eyes open until they shut. And that's the scenario for all of my family. And that's part of the life that we enjoy and live. I mean, it's pretty rugged in season, and we catch our breath in the off season now as we're entering into it. And that's the time when we market the business, do our repairs and improvements as needed for the anticipated coming season. So it's a kind of a throwback to a 150-year-old nuclear family on a ranch out on the plains. You had to work from sunup till sundown as a 100-year-old ranching family if you wanted to have food to survive the winter.
What percentage of your time in a typical week would you say that you spend on the issues we've been talking about today? So water right issues, meeting with with government agencies or other parties who have concerns about.
Recently, it's been almost unbearable intrusion. The intrusion has diminished my capacity to operate my business because I have to sit on the phone and counsel with my attorney, respond to the latest threat, plan on how we can respond, figure out what we're going to do to try to mitigate whatever that issue is. And so I have time expenses that are a significant intrusion, fiscal expenses, and the emotional expense. There's no cost to put on that. My health is diminished. My family's health is diminished. My family are in anxiety about their future. My children and my grandchildren are in anxiety about the future of the ranch because it's a piece of their family history. So the impact is far, far beyond what you might expect by looking at a balance sheet and the cost. If I have one threat to my life that is the most significant, I can endure natural forces, snowdowns and firefighters, forest fires, easier than I can endure this process. I would rather be in the middle of a forest fire. I know what I'm dealing with then. I can see where it's likely going to go. I have no way to calculate how this is going to go or if ever it will end. And that has an incalculable cost on our family psyche and our capacity to survive. Early on in my career, if somebody offered to buy my ranch, I would have flatly said no. As time evolves, my capacity to withstand this process is withered, and I start to fantasize about maybe there's an alternate for me and my family. Shall we find another place to be? Shall we give this up? Can I survive? I've been here as soon as the doors opened because I can't sleep. And I'm sitting in my chair waiting for this meeting to start so that I can hurry up and get it done. I have to have an end.
I appreciate that, and thank you for being here today to answer our questions. I have a quick housekeeping item before we get to that. You had mentioned, I think, there's a mortgage and a second mortgage, and those constitute part of your expenses. Do you, and if you don't know, that's fine, but do you happen to know what year those are anticipated to be paid off?
I recently refinanced the mortgage to a 15-year loan. I believe that was a year and a half to 2 years ago. So if things go successfully, I might have my mortgage paid off in 13 years.
And for this second mortgage?
I don't recall.
That's fine. So if we could pull up MMR 12, page 4. It's should be the LiDAR images. So do you recall yesterday Mr. Petrozelli asking you questions about the penstock and then a mark near the penstock that you described as a legacy ravine?
Yes, I do recall.
Okay, so thank you. What I'm going to do, this is just to have a clear record, because you had indicated it with the mouse, so I'm going to bring down a printout of this exact page, and then if, after confirming that it's the same thing, if you could just mark what you indicated yesterday to your best
Sure.
recollection. Let me come down. So let me know when you're ready.
Okay, go ahead.
Does this look like the exhibit that you talked
Yes.
about? Okay. Can you mark in blue, if you could just circle the penstock and the ravine feature that you were talking about?
Okay.
Okay, and if you could just give that to Mr. Buckman, we'll mark that as SWRCB 2, just for clarity in case it comes up. Thank you.
Good. I marked on that sheet the ravine as well as the capture pond, which is noted on this LiDAR map but not identified. If you will look right above the capital M for the word marble, you can see a feature which is right at the approximate 90-degree angle of the penstock blue with the lower ditch line blue. And if you can, I marked it on the page that I gave you.
I can see it. Thank you.
That is a capture pond, so that any overflow that moves down our property prior to entering into the lower ditch line has an opportunity for settling of any captured sediment. It's a feature not identified, but is significant to this discussion.
Thank you. That's it for my questions. I'm gonna pass to Ms. Irby.
Good afternoon, Mr. Cole.
Good afternoon.
I have just a few questions. Do you recall in your testimony describing a hydropower system at Blue Heron Ranch?
I do.
Could you give us a little more detail about how that works and where they connect into your system?
Yes. If you look at the same LiDAR image that we have on display right now and look to the edge of that, you can see the outfall point that's under discussion in previous testimony where the ditch line drops off and heads towards a tertiary stream which ultimately connects with Irving. So the Blue Heron has a capture point right at the base of that outfall, and the water is captured in storage tanks and then transferred through a ground-laid PVC pipe and then ultimately carried across Irving Creek in an aerial suspended pipe, and then it continues on over to the Blue Heron Ranch across the highway underneath, I believe it goes underneath the Highway 96 bridge. And so effluent that leaves Marble Mountain Ranch continues into that permitted system and provides beneficial use to the Blue Herons via their hydroelectric plant.
So the water is picked up directly following the head cut outfall?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you. Do you recall stating that the capacity of your ditch is 3 CFS?
I do.
How did you come to that conclusion?
Measurements over a long series of time, checking it at the point where I have the Stanshot diversions, checking it for various other purposes in response to water board requests, measurement of so the size and shape of the ditch geology and measuring velocities. I have a SWRCB meter, and I use that regularly in determining flows.
But this isn't correlated with the Stanshot units that you described?
The Stanshot unit system I created as a quick assessment tool. So I can drive to the point on a moment's notice, see what I have in Stanshot units and have an understanding of what we're capturing. That's separate from taking the time to fire up and run a SWRCB, do a calculation, and come up with a more accurate number. That's a daily operational tool, the Stanshot unit.
Would you consider 3 CFS to be the maximum capacity of the ditch?
I would. If I start to get beyond 3 CFS, then I'm at risk of overtopping, so I don't go there. That's what the ditches has carried historically, and that's what we claim as our right.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
On this point, Ms. Irby, I just, I appreciate your answer to the question, but I would like to know if that measurement of the ditch capacity has ever been confirmed by an engineer or an otherwise qualified professional.
That's been measured by Cascade Stream Solutions, I believe, as well as Mid-Klamath Watershed Council has looked at the ditch and the outflow, the measurements of the intake. So there was a period where under grant funding, Mid-Klamath Watershed Council was doing flow measurements at the point of diversion and below the point of diversion, getting data for what we were capturing during that year. And so they have, as an independent party, got that data.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
In your testimony, you mentioned considering possibly expanding the ranch.
Correct.
Have you looked into other alternatives such as raising rates for your guests
Raising rates.
to raise funds for improvements at the ranch?
The rate structure for the ranch is a constant thought process for us as we try to find our niche in the world of competition. So a high-end luxury ranch such as Brush Creek Ranch, if I can remember correctly, they have an equivalent daily rate of say several $100s a day per person. I cannot exceed my competitor's price without having some arguable return to the potential investor. So my rate structure is evaluated based on an analysis of what we think we can ask from the public and the cost of our services. We have a high value service, and we do regularly raise the prices based on inflation and on competition. So that's the answer is yes. I analyze that. We did just raise our price, which is published on the website, so that people can see what the 2018 rate will be. And that's not based on an attempt to capture more money for water rights improvements. It's based on my existing expense profile and competitive pressures.
Okay, one last question. Do you recall testifying to the use of power in winter to heat buildings on the property?
I do.
Are those only occupied buildings?
Typically, when we go into a winter, we do a shutdown mode. So if cabins 1 through 5, hypothetically, are not going to be used, we will shut off the water to avoid freezing issues, and electricity is not required for them. If we decide that we want to keep Quail's Nest and Sleepy Hollow, our deluxe homes, open and available for a B&B experience, then those need to be heated. And guests that visit during that time frame might want to have a wood stove experience, to have a piece of the experience of being in the woods, and so they burn wood. But that's typically an adjunct to propane or electrical heat in the cabin. And then as we go through the winter, our dining lodge and other facilities need to be heated by electricity because we don't have wood heat or propane heat available in all of the structures.
Okay.
It's also a cost issue. When the hydro plant is available, the point is it doesn't require me to burn propane.
Thank you. That's all my questions.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't have any further questions. Thanks for your patience with us and our
Sure.
questioning. We appreciate you being here, and we hear you as far as the human aspect of all of this.
Thank you for that.
And thank you for your commitment to working with the neighbors. It's been evident in your testimony, and that's the way all of our water rights issues around the state are best worked out. And so I applaud your efforts to work with folks. So with that, I wanted to request that Douglas and Heidi Cole and Marble Mountain Ranch offer exhibits into evidence.
Yes, we'd like to offer all the exhibits submitted into evidence.
And for the parties here present, does anyone have any objections? No objections. So now, for the record, the exhibits from MMR are entered into the record. And with that, yes? No. We're good on 22? Okay. Well, we've gone a little late this morning. It's about 12:32, and I'm going to suggest before we go to National Marine Fisheries Service opening statement, direct testimony, we take a break for lunch. As we've said in the notice, it will take 60 minutes. If we could be back here at 1:30, it's 58 minutes, but I hope you understand. We're trying to get through this, so yes.
Could I address some housekeeping?
Yes, before
My
we break, yes.
Yeah, my understanding, once we get back, we'll have 3 hours remaining.
Yes.
Can we get any estimate of the time period for the remaining direct testimony?
Sure, let's see, on my script, I'll have to, it looks like we've set aside an hour on National Marine Fishery Service, but as we've seen, we don't always take that much time. So that would be an hour, but yeah, you know, would you like us to come back with a more definitive answer?
Yeah, we can discuss it at the end, when we return.
Okay.
I have a concern. I have another hearing
Yeah.
about 5 hours from here tomorrow.
Okay.
So, on a schedule that I did not have any control over. So,
Sure, and yes, we want to accommodate folks' schedule, so to the extent practicable. So hearing team, we'll come up with some estimates of time. We have placeholders in our script, but we can refine them, maybe discuss with the parties your estimates of time. But it's not an exact science. Okay, all right, well, let's break for lunch, and we'll reconvene at 1:30 p.m. Thank you.